You're no longer required at Orion. Effective immediately. The email notification appeared on my phone screen as our flight reached cruising altitude somewhere over the Atlantic Ocean. I stared at the words, certain I was hallucinating from exhaustion. After 9 months of relentless travel across 4 continents, after building relationships that had taken me to Tokyo boardrooms and Frankfurt conference halls, this was how they chose to end it. My name is Samantha Keller. I'm 42 years old, and until that moment, 37,000 feet above the ocean, I was Orion Global Solutions Senior Director of International Business Development. I had dedicated the better part of a year to securing what would become the largest contract in our company's history, a $950 million logistics partnership that would transform our entire organization. The irony wasn't lost on me that they chose to fire me while I was literally in the air, rushing to close the final piece of this monumental deal. My hands trembled as I read the message again, hoping the words would somehow rearrange themselves into something that made sense. Behind me, business travelers typed on laptops, and flight attendants served drinks, completely unaware that my world had just collapsed. The professional composure I had maintained through countless negotiations threatened to crack as anger and disbelief fought for control in my chest. What they didn't realize, what Victor Dalton and his newly assembled leadership team had failed to understand, was that this wasn't just about contracts and signatures. The relationships I had built with GenCorp International in Shanghai and Altair Holdings in Munich weren't corporate transactions. They were personal bonds forged through late-night strategy sessions, cultural exchanges, and a level of trust that took months to establish. David Zhang, GenCorp's chief executive officer, had told me just last week that he considered me family. Klaus Müller from Altair Holdings had invited me to his daughter's wedding next spring. These weren't the kind of relationships that could be transferred with a termination email and a corporate handshake. As the plane continued its journey toward what I now knew would be my final client meeting as an Orion employee, a cold smile spread across my face. Victor Dalton and his team thought they could simply step in and claim credit for my work, believing that business was just about numbers on spreadsheets. They had no idea what was about to happen to their carefully laid plans. The flight attendant approached with the beverage cart, and I ordered a coffee. Black, just like my mood. I had 6 hours until we landed. 6 hours to decide exactly how I wanted to handle the biggest betrayal of my professional career. What Victor didn't know was that loyalty worked both ways, and he was about to learn that lesson in the most expensive way possible. 9 months earlier, I had walked into the headquarters of Orion Global Solutions in Charlotte, North Carolina, carrying what I believed would be the opportunity of a lifetime. The company had built a solid reputation in domestic logistics, but international expansion had always been their white whale. Previous attempts had failed spectacularly, leaving executives gun-shy about venturing beyond familiar territory. That's where I came in. My 15 years of experience in international business development, combined with my fluency in Mandarin and German, made me exactly what Orion needed to crack the global market. The interview process had been intense, 3 rounds with different executives, each one more skeptical than the last about whether a company like ours could compete with established international players. We've tried this before. Chief Executive Officer Harold Brennan had warned me during our final meeting. The last person we sent overseas came back empty-handed after 6 months and $250,000 in expenses. What makes you think you can succeed where others have failed? I had looked him straight in the eye and answered with the confidence that had carried me through my entire career. Because I don't just close deals. I build relationships. And relationships are what drive international business, not presentations or promises. Brennan had been impressed enough to give me carte blanche, unlimited travel budget, complete autonomy over negotiations, and the freedom to structure deals however I saw fit. It was everything I had ever wanted in a professional role, and I threw myself into the work with unprecedented dedication. The first breakthrough came in Tokyo, where I spent 3 weeks learning the intricacies of Japanese business culture before even scheduling my first meeting. By the time I sat down with potential partners, I understood not just what they needed logistically, but how they preferred to conduct business. Respect, patience, and genuine interest in their success opened doors that aggressive American sales tactics had previously slammed shut. From Tokyo, I moved to Shanghai, where my Mandarin skills and understanding of Chinese negotiation styles helped me connect with David Zhang at GenCorp International. David was initially skeptical. Too many Western companies had promised partnership only to treat Chinese firms as subordinates. But I approached our relationship as equals, spending time understanding their long-term vision and finding ways Orion could genuinely support their growth. The European leg of my journey brought me to Munich, where Klaus Müller at Altair Holdings became not just a business partner, but a genuine friend. Klaus appreciated my direct communication style and my willingness to invest time in understanding the nuances of European logistics regulations. He often joked that I understood his business better than some of his own executives. Each relationship had been built slowly, carefully, with countless dinners, cultural exchanges, and honest conversations about mutual goals. These weren't transactions. They were foundations for long-term partnerships that would benefit everyone involved. As my plane descended toward the airport, I realized that Victor Dalton and his team had just made the costliest mistake in Orion's history. They thought they were firing an employee. Instead, they had just destroyed the only thing holding this entire deal together. The corporate coup had happened while I was literally flying between continents, too focused on closing the deal to notice the political maneuvering happening back home. Harold Brennan, the chief executive officer who had hired me and given me complete freedom to build these international relationships, had suffered a heart attack 6 weeks earlier. While I was in Munich finalizing contract details with Klaus Müller, the board of directors had installed Victor Dalton as interim chief executive officer. Victor was everything Harold wasn't: politically calculating, risk-averse, and obsessed with appearances over substance. He had built his career on taking credit for other people's work, and my success in securing the $950 million deal had apparently threatened his carefully constructed image as the company's visionary leader. What I didn't know during those final weeks of negotiations was that Victor had been systematically undermining my position with the board. He had convinced them that I was becoming too visible in international circles, that clients were starting to see me as the face of Orion rather than supporting the company brand. According to office gossip I would later learn about, Victor had argued that allowing any single employee to become so central to major deals was a dangerous precedent. "We need to institutionalize these relationships," he had reportedly told the board during an emergency meeting. "Relying on one person creates too much risk. What happens if she leaves or gets poached by a competitor? We need to establish Orion as the brand these clients want to work with, not Samantha Keller." The board, still reeling from Harold's sudden absence and worried about the company's stability, had bought into Victor's argument completely. They authorized him to transition my responsibilities to a team-based approach, effective immediately. In corporate speak, that meant firing me the moment the contracts were signed and having other executives step in to manage the relationships I had spent 9 months building. Victor's plan was breathtakingly naive. He believed that business relationships at this level were purely transactional, that David Zhang and Klaus Müller would continue working with Orion regardless of who managed their accounts, as long as the terms remained favorable. He had no understanding of the personal trust and cultural connections that had made these deals possible in the first place. From his perspective, the timing was perfect. The contracts were 95% complete, with only final signatures needed from all parties. He could fire me, take credit for the successful negotiations, and position himself as the mastermind behind Orion's international expansion. The board would see him as a decisive leader who had successfully managed a complex transition while securing the company's future. As my plane touched down at Charlotte Douglas International Airport, I felt a mixture of fury and anticipation. Victor thought he was so clever, timing my termination to coincide with the deal's completion. He had no idea that he had just handed me the perfect opportunity to demonstrate exactly how wrong he was about the nature of international business relationships. The $950 million lesson he was about to receive would be one that neither he nor the board would ever forget. The airport terminal felt surreal as I walked through customs with my termination email still glowing on my phone screen. Travelers rushed past me toward their connections while I stood motionless, processing the magnitude of what Victor Dalton had just done. 9 months of my life, countless flights, missed family gatherings, and professional relationships built on trust and mutual respect, all dismissed with a single corporate email sent while I was trapped in an aluminum tube at 37,000 feet. I called an Uber instead of using the company car service, a small but symbolic gesture of independence. During the 20-minute ride to my apartment in downtown Charlotte, I began planning my response. Victor clearly expected me to slink away quietly, perhaps fight the termination through legal channels or human resources. He had no idea what kind of storm he had just unleashed. My phone rang as I unlocked my front door. David Zhang's number appeared on the screen, and I answered with a forced calm that belied the anger burning in my chest. "Samantha, my friend." David's warm voice carried across the Pacific. "I wanted to confirm our schedule for tomorrow's final signature ceremony. My team is very excited to complete this partnership with Orion." "David, we need to talk," I said, settling into my living room chair. "There's been an unexpected development on Orion's side that you should know about." I explained the situation as diplomatically as possible, watching the city lights twinkle outside my window while David processed the information. The silence stretched for nearly a minute before he spoke again, his voice noticeably cooler. "They terminated you while you were traveling to finalize our agreement?" David asked, incredulous. "After 9 months of building this relationship together?" "That's correct," I confirmed. "Effective immediately, according to the email I received mid-flight." Another pause, this one even longer. When David spoke again, his tone had shifted from friendly to business formal. "Samantha, you understand that GenCorp International entered this agreement based on our personal relationship and trust in your expertise. We have worked together through cultural barriers, regulatory challenges, and complex negotiations because we believed in your commitment to our mutual success." "I understand completely," I replied, knowing exactly where this conversation was heading. "Then you will also understand that GenCorp cannot proceed with an organization that treats its most valuable employees in such a manner. If Orion believes they can simply replace you and continue as if nothing has changed, they have severely misjudged the nature of international business relationships." My heart rate quickened as David continued. "I will be sending a formal notification to Orion tomorrow morning, withdrawing from all negotiations. GenCorp International will not be moving forward with this partnership." The first domino had fallen, exactly as I had hoped it would. But David wasn't finished. "However," he said, his voice warming again, "I would be very interested in discussing future opportunities with whatever organization is fortunate enough to secure your services next. Your reputation in international logistics is exceptional, and GenCorp values loyalty and competence above all else." After ending the call with David, I immediately dialed Klaus Müller in Munich. It was early morning there, but Klaus was an early riser who often started his day with coffee and international news. He answered on the second ring. "Samantha? Perfect timing. I was just reviewing the final contract terms for tomorrow's meeting. Everything looks excellent." "Klaus, I'm afraid there's been a complication," I began, then explained the situation with the same measured tone I had used with David. Klaus's reaction was even more explosive than David's had been. "Mein Gott, they fired you by email while you were traveling on their behalf. This is not how serious business is conducted, Samantha. This is not how partners treat their most valuable assets. I wanted you to hear it from me directly before you heard from Orion," I said. "You can be certain that Altair Holdings will not be proceeding with any organization that operates in such an unprofessional manner," Klaus declared. "This partnership was built on trust. Trust in you, your expertise, and your integrity. If Orion believes they can simply substitute personnel at this level without consequences, they understand nothing about European business culture. 2 phone calls, 2 withdrawn partnerships, $950 million evaporating into thin air. By 9 a.m. the next morning, Victor Dalton's carefully orchestrated plan was crumbling faster than he could comprehend. I had spent the evening crafting formal emails to both David and Klaus, providing them with professional language they could use in their withdrawal notifications to Orion. I wanted to ensure that when Victor tried to salvage the situation, he would face absolutely clear rejections that left no room for misinterpretation. My phone started buzzing at 8:30 a.m. with missed calls from Orion's main number. Victor had apparently arrived at the office to find formal withdrawal notifications from both GenCorp International and Altair Holdings waiting in his inbox. According to sources I still had inside the company, his assistant could hear him shouting through his closed office door. The third call came directly to my personal phone, Victor's number flashing on the screen. I let it ring 4 times before answering with professional detachment. "Samantha, what have you done?" Victor's voice was strained, barely controlled. "I have withdrawal notices from both our primary clients. They're claiming breach of contract based on personnel changes." "Good morning, Victor," I replied calmly. "I assume you're calling about the inevitable consequences of your decision to terminate me via email while I was traveling on company business." "This is sabotage," he accused. "You deliberately poisoned these relationships out of spite." "On the contrary," I said, enjoying every word. "I simply informed our former clients about the change in personnel, as is standard professional courtesy. Their decisions to withdraw were entirely their own, based on their assessment of Orion's commitment to honoring business relationships." I could hear papers shuffling frantically in the background. "Samantha, be reasonable. These were isolated decisions made for the good of the company. We can work something out, maybe a consulting arrangement to transition these accounts properly." "I'm afraid that's impossible, Victor. You see, I've already accepted a position with Strathern Global, your primary competitor in international logistics. My start date is Monday." The silence on the other end stretched so long, I wondered if the call had dropped. When Victor finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "You can't be serious." "Completely serious. David Jung and Klaus Muller have both expressed interest in establishing new partnerships with Strathern, given our existing working relationships. I'll be joining as Executive Vice President of Global Strategy, with complete authority over international client development." "The board will never allow this," Victor threatened. "We'll enforce your non-compete clause, sue for damages, whatever it takes." I laughed, a sound that held no warmth whatsoever. "Victor, you might want to review my employment contract before making threats. Harold Brennan was so eager to secure my services that he waived the standard non-compete restrictions. He understood that international business development requires flexibility and freedom. Apparently that's another detail you failed to research before orchestrating your little coup." The background noise suggested Victor was frantically searching through files, probably looking for my original contract. "This isn't over, Samantha. You think you can destroy 9 months of work because your feelings got hurt?" "I didn't destroy anything, Victor. You did that the moment you sent that termination email. I simply informed valued business partners about a change that affected their contracts. Everything that happened afterward was a direct result of your decision to prioritize internal politics over client relationships." "The board meeting is at 10 a.m., Victor said, his voice now carrying a note of desperation. "If you reconsider and come back, we can make this all go away. Triple your salary, equity participation, whatever you want." "That's very generous," I replied. "But I'm afraid my new position at Strathern comes with significantly better compensation and the respect I should have received at Orion." "Goodbye, Victor. Best of luck explaining to the board how you managed to lose $950 million in a single morning." The emergency board meeting at Orion was scheduled for 10 a.m., but by 11:30 a.m., Victor Dalton was no longer the interim chief executive officer. Word traveled fast through Charlotte's business community, and by noon, local news outlets were reporting on Orion's spectacular failure to close what would have been the largest deal in the company's history. I was sitting in Strathern Global's executive conference room, signing my new employment contract, when my former colleague Jennifer Bailey called with updates from inside Orion. Jennifer had been my closest ally during my time there, and she was horrified by how the situation had unfolded. "Samantha, it's complete chaos here," Jennifer whispered into the phone. "The board called Victor into the meeting at 10 a.m. and he came out an hour later carrying a cardboard box. Security escorted him to his car. "What about Harold?" I asked, genuinely concerned about my former boss's health. "Harold's recovering well, and the board asked him to resume his duties immediately. He's furious about what happened. Apparently, he had no idea about Victor's plan to terminate you. He tried calling both GenCorp and Altair to salvage the relationships, but both David and Klaus told him the damage was irreversible." I felt a twinge of sympathy for Harold, who had given me the opportunity to build something extraordinary at Orion. But business was business, and Victor's actions had poisoned the well beyond any possibility of repair. "The board is already discussing legal action against Victor for gross negligence," Jennifer continued. "They're estimating the total loss at over $1 billion when you factor in the long-term revenue projections and the damage to Orion's reputation in international markets." Charles Strathern, my new chief executive officer, gestured for my attention from across the conference table. Strathern Global had been pursuing both GenCorp and Altair for years without success, and my arrival with established relationships had transformed their international expansion prospects overnight. "Jennifer, I need to go," I said. "Please give Harold my regards and tell him I'm sorry things ended this way." "Samantha, wait," Jennifer said urgently. "Harold asked me to tell you something. He said that what Victor did was unconscionable, and he's recommending you for the International Business Leader of the Year award. He wants everyone to know that Orion's loss was entirely self-inflicted." After ending the call, I turned my attention back to Charles, who was reviewing the preliminary agreements that David and Klaus had already expressed interest in signing with Strathern. "Both clients want to fast-track the negotiations," Charles explained. "They're eager to formalize partnerships before the end of the quarter. David Zhang is flying in from Shanghai next week, and Klaus Müller is arranging a video conference to discuss expanded logistics services across European markets." The contrast couldn't have been starker. At Orion, I had spent 9 months carefully building these relationships, only to have them destroyed by executive arrogance and poor judgment. At Strathern, those same relationships were being welcomed and valued, with both clients expressing enthusiasm about working with a company that understood the importance of personal trust in international business. "There's one more thing," Charles added with a slight smile. "David Zhang mentioned that GenCorp is considering additional partnerships in Southeast Asian markets. He specifically requested that you lead those negotiations, given your success in building cross-cultural business relationships." As I looked out at Charlotte's skyline from Strathern's 42nd floor conference room, I realized that Victor's betrayal had actually opened doors I never could have imagined. The $950 million he had lost was just the beginning of what would become a much larger shift in the international logistics landscape. 6 months later, I stood in the lobby of Strathern Global's new international headquarters, watching the local business news coverage of Orion's quarterly earnings report. The numbers were even worse than anyone had predicted. Not only had they lost the $950 million deal with GenCorp and Altair Holdings, but their reputation for unreliability had spread throughout the international logistics community. Orion Global Solutions reported a 34% decline in revenue this quarter, the news anchor announced, following the loss of what industry experts are calling the largest international partnership in the company's history. Stock prices have fallen to their lowest point in 5 years, and analysts are questioning the company's long-term viability in global markets. The irony was delicious. Victor Dalton had fired me to prevent any single employee from becoming too central to major deals, but his actions had achieved exactly the opposite result. My departure had taken with it not just the immediate contracts, but any hope of Orion establishing credibility in international business circles. David Zhang walked up beside me, adjusting his tie before our meeting with potential clients from Singapore. Our partnership at Strathern had exceeded every expectation, with GenCorp serving as a reference for other Asian companies interested in working with us. "Have you seen the latest industry reports?" David asked with a knowing smile. 3 more companies have canceled negotiations with Orion this month. Apparently, word has spread about how they treat their business development professionals. Klaus Müller joined us from the elevator, having just arrived from Munich for our quarterly planning session. "The European Logistics Council is using Orion as a case study in corporate mismanagement," he chuckled. They're teaching business schools about the importance of valuing human relationships in international commerce. And meanwhile, I said, gesturing toward the earnings report still playing on the lobby television, Strathern just announced record profits and expansion into 4 new markets. The transformation had been remarkable. Within 6 months, my relationships with David and Klaus had opened doors throughout Asia and Europe that Strathern had been trying to access for years. We had signed partnerships in 12 countries, with combined contract values exceeding $2.3 billion. The final act of poetic justice came when Harold Brennan called me personally to extend an offer I never saw coming. Orion's board of directors had apparently spent months analyzing what went wrong with their international expansion, and they had reached an inevitable conclusion. They needed me back. Samantha, I know this might sound impossible after what Victor put you through, Harold began during our phone conversation, but the board has authorized me to make you an offer that reflects how badly we mishandled this situation. The offer was staggering. Chief Executive Officer of International Operations, a newly created position that would make me the highest paid executive in Orion's history. Stock options, unlimited travel budget, complete autonomy over international strategy, and a formal apology from the board of directors. Harold, I appreciate the gesture, I replied, but I'm quite happy at Strathern. We've built something extraordinary here. I understand, but please consider it. Orion isn't the same company without your expertise. I had spent weeks deciding how to respond to what I knew would eventually come. Tell you what, Harold, I'll consider a consulting arrangement. Strathern could provide strategic guidance to help Orion rebuild their international reputation. Our fee would be $5 million per quarter, with a minimum 2-year commitment. The silence stretched for nearly 30 seconds. You want Orion to pay Strathern $10 million per year for consulting services? That's correct. Consider it tuition for the business lesson Victor provided. If Orion is serious about learning from their mistakes, they'll invest in proper guidance from professionals who understand international relationship management. Harold ultimately declined, but the offer itself was the perfect conclusion to this corporate drama. Victor's $950 million mistake had not only destroyed Orion's international prospects, but had positioned their primary competitor, my new company, as the dominant force in global logistics partnerships. Looking back on the revenge that unfolded naturally from Victor's own arrogance, I realized that sometimes the best victories are the ones where you simply step aside and let people destroy themselves.